The police said it was unsafe. The neighbors said it was cursed. But a winter-worn veteran bought the old Denver cabin anyway, the one buried in snow and whispers. He just wanted peace, a place to breathe again. But on the very first night, his German shepherd froze at the hallway door, then began growling at the floorboards like something alive was beneath them. When he pried the boards open, he found a hidden box. Inside it, letters, maps, and a name tied to his own bloodline. A secret a fallen soldier had tried to pass on before disappearing forever. What Jack uncovered would unravel an entire family history, expose a truth buried under decades of snow, and change the lives of everyone who ever set foot in that forgotten cabin. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, city, state, or country. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. A thin curtain of winter snow fell over Denver's streets, softening the city's lights into a cold, silver haze. Jack Miller walked with his shoulders slightly hunched, his breath forming small clouds that drifted away like ghosts escaping him. At 42, Jack carried the look of a man older than his years, tall, lean, with sharply cut cheekbones, and a jawline roughened by a day-old stubble. His hair, once dark, was now brushed with premature frost at the temples. His eyes were a muted hazel, the kind that had learned to observe everything while giving away nothing. Years serving in harsh deserts had carved a permanent tension into his posture, a readiness to react that never left him even now far from the front lines. He walked quietly beside Rex, his 4-year-old German shepherd. Rex was a powerful dog, broad-chested, his coat a blend of deep brown and black, with a pale saddle marking down his back. His ears were sharp and alert, his gait confident. Rex was loyalty shaped into muscle and instinct, a creature who had once been trained to sense danger and respond faster than fear. Night after night, Rex slept curled at Jack's feet, keeping the nightmares at bay long enough for Jack to catch a few hours of shallow, restless sleep. Tonight the snow was falling harder, the kind that blanketed the sidewalks faster than the plows could clear them. Jack had taken Rex for a late walk simply because the quiet helped him feel less crowded by his own thoughts. Winter nights in Denver had that strange way of making the world feel paused, like everything held its breath. But Rex felt something Jack didn't. The dog's ears suddenly perked, his body stiffening, like a bowstring pulled tight. Jack noticed the subtle shift. Someone else might have missed it, but he had learned Rex's silent language years ago. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, though his own chest had tightened. Rex ignored the calm voice and fixed his bright amber eyes toward the old warehouse district near the train tracks, a place long abandoned. Its windows bordered its loading docks, covered in graffiti and used pallets. The dog growled low and rumbling. Then, without warning, Rex tugged the leash so violently that Jack had to brace his boots in the snow. "Rex, hey, slow down," Jack hissed, but there was no slowing him. Rex's instincts were flaring like alarms. The dog wasn't afraid, he was focused, determined. Jack's training as a Marine reconnaissance scout clicked into place instantly. Rex was never wrong about danger. Never. The warehouse district loomed ahead, dark as a scar on the white landscape. Jack had walked past it many times, always feeling the strange emptiness around it. Tonight, the snow made it look even more deserted, like a place cut off from the world entirely. Rex pulled harder. Jack swallowed a small knot of unease and let the dog lead his boots, crunching through thick snow that swallowed his footsteps. The cold wind sliced across his cheeks like thin blades, and he pulled his thick winter coat tighter around him. The coat, dark navy with worn elbows, had been with Hilsfon since his final deployment. His scarf, a simple gray wool thing, was one of the few gifts his sister had sent before they lost contact. Little pieces of life he carried like armor. As they neared the warehouse, Jack flicked on his flashlight. The beam stretched across the snow like a pale sword, illuminating swirling flakes and casting long shadows with every movement. The warehouse, squat and rusting, sat silent. But Rex's growl deepened, vibrating through the leash. At the edge of the loading dock, snow had piled high against the building. Rex dragged Jack up the wooden steps, his claws clicking sharply against the old boards. The door hung slightly ajar, enough for wind to whistle through the crack. Rex pushed it with his nose, and it creaked inward with a sound like a groan from something ancient. "What the hell is it, boy?" Jack whispered, though his voice faltered. The warehouse swallowed the light. Inside it was a cavern of shadows and the smell of cold metal. Thick pillars rose like silent giants, holding up a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. Broken crates, old machinery, and neglected pallets littered the concrete floor. Something about the space felt wrong, not dangerous necessarily, but abandoned with purpose. Rex's body, lowered muscles rippling, tail stiff. He was no longer tugging, he was leading. And Jack followed, every sense sharpened to the point of discomfort. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. The Marine in him resurfaced fully. Jack swept the flashlight across the floor, catching glimpses of old paint, half-torn posters, shattered glass. The wind hummed through cracks in the roof. A train passed somewhere outside, its distant rumble echoing faintly, shaking dust loose from high beams. Rex guided him deeper into the belly of the warehouse, toward the far end, where a small door sat crooked on its hinges, leading to a narrow hallway. Jack hesitated. His mind wrestled with memory-dusty hallways in foreign countries, doors that led to things no one should have to see, ghosts of explosions that still rang in his ears. Rex nudged his thigh gently, as if grounding him, then growled softly toward the hallway again. Jack exhaled slowly and stepped inside. The hallway was lined with old office doors, most broken, or missing papers scattered like brittle leaves on the floor. A faint metallic smell lingered, mixed with the cold scent of winter air creeping through broken vents. At the very end of the hall, Rex stopped. He didn't bark. He simply placed a paw against the door's bottom edge and whimpered. Jack shone his light at the door's threshold. Fresh footprints. Small. Light. Not an adult's. They led inside. Jack's pulse jumped. "Someone's here," he whispered. His voice felt too loud. He grabbed the doorknob slowly, twisting it until it clicked. The door swung open. Rex stepped inside first. The beam of the flashlight followed, and what it revealed made Jack inhale sharply. Curled up behind an overturned desk was a boy maybe 10 years old, thin as winter branches. He had messy light brown hair sticking out in anxious tufts from under a torn beanie. His face was pale from cold, cheeks reddened and cracked. His coat, an old puffer jacket with a broken zipper, was far too big for him, sleeves hanging past his fingers. He clutched a ripped backpack to his chest like a shield. His eyes, wide blue and shining with fear, looked at Rex first, then at Jack. The boy didn't speak. He trembled visibly, exhaustion etched in every line of his tiny body. Jack slowly knelt, lowering the flashlight so the beam wouldn't blind him. "Hey," Jack said softly, his voice gentle in a way he rarely used. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." Rex approached in careful steps, lowering his head and letting out a soft, reassuring whine. The boy's eyes softened, a flicker of hope breaking through fear. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like thin ice. "Please, don't send me back." Jack felt something shift inside his chest. Something old, something he thought had died long ago. He didn't know who this child was, or why he was hiding out here in the freezing dark, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: Rex had found him for a reason. And this night in Denver was about to change everything. The moment Jack lifted Tommy into the beam of his flashlight, the warehouse no longer felt empty, it felt like a crossroads. Snow whistled faintly through a broken window behind them, and Rex stayed close to the boy. His thick tail lowered, but relaxed, as though he understood more than either of them could. Jack studied the child more closely, now that the initial shock had thinned. Tommy looked even smaller in the cold light, his face narrow cheeks, hollow from hunger, lips cracked from the dry winter wind. His light brown hair stuck out in uneven clumps beneath his beanie, and his blue eyes, though red from crying, held a flicker of stubbornness that didn't belong to a child who had given up. Jack recognized that spark. He'd seen it in young recruits who had survived too much pain too early. "Can you stand?" Jack asked, voice low, steady, gentle, in a way that felt unnatural on his tongue. The boy nodded and let Jack pull him up. His small hands were ice cold through the frayed gloves he wore. Rex pressed his warm body against the boy's legs, letting out a soft huff of reassurance. He's nice," Tommy murmured, rubbing Rex's fur with trembling fingers. "He won't let anything hurt you," Jack replied. And strangely, in that moment, he meant it more than he understood. The walk back to Jack's apartment was slow. Tommy could barely keep up, his knees wobbling from exhaustion and cold. Jack ended up kneeling and letting the boy climb onto his back, the small arms wrapping around his neck so lightly he could barely feel them. Rex trotted ahead, stopping every few steps to ensure they were following. By the time they reached the apartment building, a modest aging structure with brick walls dulled by decades of harsh winter's snow coated their shoulders and hair in powdery white. Inside, the radiators clanged and hissed, filling the narrow hallway with uneven warmth. Jack's apartment was small but neat, the way soldiers kept things when order meant survival. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph, Jack in uniform, standing beside two other Marines. One of them had tattooed forearms and a wide grin. The other had a calm, steady expression and blonde hair tucked neatly beneath his cap. Both were gone now, one to an IED blast, the other to the quiet war no one could see. Jack hung his coat on a hook, then guided Tommy to sit on an old couch covered in a thick wool blanket. Rex immediately curled up at the boy's feet, his head resting on Tommy's ankle. "Stay there. I'll warm something up for you," Jack said. His voice kept its usual rough edge, but inside he felt a shifting, an uncomfortable stirring of protectiveness. He moved to the kitchen area, really just a counter with a stove beside it, and ladled leftover vegetable soup from a pot. As the broth warmed, Tommy's eyes drifted around the room. He held the ripped backpack on his lap, gripping the straps like they were the only solid things left in his world. When Jack set the steaming bowl on the coffee table, Tommy whispered, "Thank you." It was barely audible. Jack nodded and sat nearby, elbows on his knees, watching the boy eat. The first spoonful nearly made Tommy cry again. "How long were you out there?" Jack asked gently. Tommy swallowed hard. Since Tuesday." Jack felt a bolt of anger, not at the boy, but at whatever had driven him out into the deadly cold. "You said your stepmother," Tommy nodded. She yells a lot. And she hits. But she gets worse when she drinks." Jack clenched his jaw. He had known adults like that during his childhood, men who came home angry at the world and took it out on whoever was small enough not to fight back. "Where's your father?" The boy looked down into the soup. "He died. 2 years ago, car accident." His voice cracked. Rex nudged his knee again, as if the dog could feel the pain rolling off the child. Jack sat back, letting out a slow breath. His chest tightened the way it used to right before a firefight, except this time the battlefield was inside him. "We'll call someone," Jack said. "There's an agency that can help." Tommy stiffened, spoon trembling in his grip. No, don't send me back. I'm not sending you back." Jack met the boy's eyes. "But you can't just stay hidden in warehouses either." Tommy hesitated, then slowly unzipped his backpack. "There's something you need to see." The boy pulled out a bundle wrapped carefully in a torn cloth. When he unrolled it, the air in the room seemed to change. Inside were several military documents, slightly crinkled but intact. The logo of the United States Army stamped every corner. And on top of the stack lay a single envelope, yellowed with age edges curled from years of neglect. The name, handwritten in faded ink, made Jack's breath stop. David Miller. Jack reached for the envelope with a hand that felt too heavy. He knew the name, had only heard it whispered in fragments from older relatives. David Miller, his father's older brother, a man who enlisted young, fought bravely, and never came home. The family rarely spoke about him, but Jack had always felt their silence came from grief, not shame. He opened the envelope. Inside was a letter David had written near the end of his deployment. The writing was firm, uneven from haste. He spoke of men he served, with sacrifices they made, and a small fund they'd put together from their paychecks, money meant to support struggling veteran families if they never returned. The last line read, "If anyone in my bloodline ever finds this, finish what I couldn't." Jack felt the words sink into him, heavy as stone. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Tommy swallowed. "My mom. My real mom. She worked part-time for an old veteran in our neighborhood. He was kinda quiet, but nice. He always kept these papers locked in a box." Name Jack pressed. The boy closed his eyes, trying to remember. "Mr. Weber, I think. He got sick. Went to the hospital last year. He never came back home." Jack leaned back slowly. Weber. The name scratched at something in his memory, but he couldn't place it. "My mom said, if anything ever happened to her, I should give this to a real soldier," Tommy whispered. "Someone who wouldn't throw it away." Jack swallowed hard. Rex lifted his head, watching Jack with intelligent, steady eyes, sensing the storm inside him. The room felt suddenly too small, too warm, too full of ghosts. Outside, snow kept falling, covering Denver in layers of white silence. Inside Jack's past, one he thought long buried had just been opened by the hands of a child. And Jack knew, with absolute clarity, that his life had already changed. The morning after Tommy revealed the letter, Denver lay beneath a sheet of unmoving winter fog, the kind that blurred the horizon into a dull band of white. Jack stood by the apartment window, one hand gripping the thin curtain, as though anchoring himself. His breath formed faint clouds in the cold air. The old heater rattled, but failed to warm the room fully. Behind him, Tommy slept, curled beneath a thick blanket on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Rex lay beside the boy, as if guarding him from nightmares, his broad chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. Jack looked again at the letter on the table, the faded ink, the trembling handwriting of his Uncle David, a man he had never met, but whose absence had shaped his family in ways he couldn't fully understand. The weight of the letter felt heavier this morning, as though the words had soaked into the air during the night. "If anyone in my bloodline ever finds this, finish what I couldn't." Jack felt the old familiar tightness around his ribs, the one that preceded memories of war pressing against the edges of his mind. He forced his gaze away from the letter, and toward the snow-covered world outside. A thick silence settled around him, the kind that mirrored the quiet he used to feel right before stepping into dangerous terrain overseas. Rex's ears twitched. Even half asleep, the dog sensed Jack's turmoil. The sun rose slowly, casting pale gold onto the frosted windows. Tommy stirred, yawning softly, rubbing his eyes with the back of his small hand. When he noticed Jack standing rigid in the dim morning light, he pushed himself to sit up straighter. "You okay?" he asked, his voice still small but steadier than last night. Jack turned slightly, studying the boy. The swelling on Tommy's cheek, likely from days of cold and stress, was more visible in the light. His hair sticking up in different directions made him look younger, more vulnerable. Jack nodded once. "Yeah. You sleep all right?" Tommy nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around his frail frame. "Rex kept me warm." At the mention of his name, Rex lifted his head and let out a soft boof, his tail thudding once against the couch. Jack allowed a faint, fleeting smile. "He's good at that." The boy hesitated before speaking again. You're gonna go to the house, right?" "The one in the letter." Jack's fingers tightened around the curtain. He looked away, feeling old wounds waking inside him, wounds that didn't bleed but still ached with memory. "Yeah," he finally answered. "We're going." He didn't add that part of him wished he could stay here in the relative safety of his small apartment, pretending the letter meant nothing. But the truth was a stubborn thing, and Rex, sensing the shift in Jack's demeanor, stood and walked to him, resting his head against Jack's thigh. In the quiet of the room, it felt like a vow. They prepared to leave a little after noon. Tommy put on one of Jack's old sweaters, too big for him, sleeves rolled up almost 3 times, and a puffy winter coat Jack dug out from the closet. The boy looked warmer now and a bit more hopeful. Jack packed a small bag with essentials, water, snacks, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and the letter. The house mentioned in the letter was a 40-minute drive from the city center, in a quiet stretch of old suburban neighborhoods halfway reclaimed by woods and winter storms. Jack hadn't been to that side of Denver in years. As they stepped outside, the wind hit them hard, whipping snow across the sidewalk. Tommy shivered but didn't complain. Rex shook his thick fur, sending sparkling flecks of frost into the air, and then walked firmly at their side. Jack's truck, a battered old Ford with faded paint and a cracked back window, sat parked under a mound of snow. He brushed off the windshield with stiff hands, while Tommy waited inside the cab, small fingers pressed against the window, as he watched Rex trot in circles around the truck, scanning the area the way he always did. Finally, they were on the road. The heater blew warm air in bursts, cutting through the frost on the inside of the windows. Tommy held the letter in his lap, his thumbs tracing the creases of the envelope as though memorizing them. "You ever know him?" he asked quietly. Jack kept his eyes on the road. "No. David died long before I was born. My father didn't talk about him much. Was he a good man?" Jack swallowed, remembering the few bits of information he'd heard from his grandmother. David was brave, loyal, stubborn, and carried a deep sense of responsibility that sometimes bordered on self-sacrifice. "Yeah," Jack answered softly. "From everything I've heard, he was." The truck rumbled down quieter streets as houses thinned and tall pines appeared, branches heavy with snow. The neighborhood they entered had an air of abandonment, not empty, but frozen in time. Houses with sagging roofs, fences leaning sideways, mailboxes missing numbers. But eventually, as they followed the faded address on David's letter, they reached a small gravel road almost swallowed by winter. A single mailbox, rusted and nearly illegible, leaned to the side, but the numbers carved faintly into the metal matched the ones on the envelope. "This is it," Jack murmured. The house appeared at the end of the narrow path, its wooden frame coated in frost, like sugar dusting on an old cake. The roof sagged slightly, but the structure still stood solid. Its windows were clouded, the front porch covered in snow except for one corner where the wind had swept it bare. Tommy stepped out of the truck, slowly, eyes wide as he took in the sight. "It looks lonely," he said. Jack nodded. "Yeah, it does." Rex, however, was alert. The dog's ears flicked forward, nose raised, body trembling with anticipation. Jack knelt, placing a hand on Rex's thick fur. "What do you smell?" Rex didn't bark. He simply pushed forward, tugging Jack toward the porch. The front door was locked, but the wood was old and weakened by years of storms. Jack nudged it with his shoulder, and the door creaked open with a long, groaning complaint. Inside, dust motes floated like tiny ghosts in the thin light. The house smelled of cold wood, forgotten memories, and something faintly metallic, old furniture, nails maybe. A coat rack stood by the entrance, still holding a single empty hanger. The living room had an old sofa, its fabric faded, and a small wooden table with a cracked leg supported by a stack of magazines. Tommy wandered carefully, running a small hand over the edge of a framed photograph on the wall. It showed a young man in uniform, broad-shouldered, handsome, with dark hair and a confident smile. Jack inhaled sharply. David looked like his father, and Jack looked like both of them. Tommy turned the photograph toward him. "He looks like you." Jack didn't answer. Rex found something first. The dog stood rigid in the corner near a tall cabinet with peeling paint. He pressed his nose against the base, whining softly. Jack quickly crossed the room and knelt beside him. The cabinet's wood was slightly warped, and when Jack pried along the bottom edge, a thin panel popped loose, revealing a narrow compartment hidden beneath. Tommy crouched beside him, eyes wide. Inside the compartment sat a metal box, dark green, dented from age, with a tarnished military lock on the front. A tag hung from the handle, "M family only." Jack's pulse pounded. His hands shook slightly as he lifted it. The box was heavy. Very heavy. Behind him, Tommy whispered, "Do you think he wanted you to find it?" Jack didn't speak. He only knew one thing for sure: nothing about this was accidental. Rex pressed closer, tail still but ears forward. The air in the room felt charged, thick with the weight of the past. Jack set the box on the dusty table. His throat tightened. His fingers hovered above the lock. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him braced for what might come next. And there, in that long neglected house, with Tommy's hopeful eyes and Rex's unwavering presence, Jack finally opened the box, unaware that the truth inside would tie them all to a story far larger than any of them imagined. The interior of the wooden house felt colder than the winter outside, as though time itself had drained the warmth from its walls. Jack stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light slipping through the frosted windows. Rex moved ahead with purpose, his paws silent on the dusty floorboards, nose twitching at every unfamiliar scent. Tommy stayed close to Jack, the boy's small hand clinging softly to the sleeve of Jack's jacket. His breath formed faint clouds in the chill air, his wide blue eyes drifting from old photographs on the walls to furniture draped in aged linens. It felt like walking through a forgotten memory, one crafted long before any of them were born. Jack set the metal box, heavy with the weight of David's legacy, on the rickety table near the center of the room. Dust billowed upward the moment it made contact, swirling briefly like restless spirits before settling again. "This place is kind of scary," Tommy said softly, though his voice held more wonder than fear. Jack nodded. "Yeah, feels like the walls are watching." Rex barked once as if agreeing, then trotted to the far corner of the living room, where framed photographs hung in uneven lines. Jack followed, brushing dust from the glass of one frame, and revealing an image of David Miller standing tall in uniform, his arm around a smaller boy who couldn't have been more than 6. The boy had messy, dark hair, round eyes, and a shy half-smile. Jack inhaled sharply. "That's my dad," he whispered. Tommy leaned closer. "He looks like you, just smaller." "Yeah," Jack murmured, his voice heavy. "Smaller and still whole." He traced the edge of the frame, feeling the ghost of a family bond he had never understood. His father had rarely spoken of David, but grief often silenced the things that mattered most. Rex shifted suddenly, ears perked, tail held high. His body angled toward the hallway that disappeared deeper into the house. Jack stiffened. "Easy," he said, though his muscles had already tensed with old instincts. He picked up the flashlight from the table and led Tommy and Rex into the hallway. The floor creaked under their weight, and the walls narrowed as if squeezing them between years of unspoken stories. At the end of the hall was a small room with a single window half covered by a tattered curtain. Rex stopped at the threshold, nose pressed to the crack beneath the door. Jack turned the knob. The door opened with a groan, revealing a room that looked untouched for decades. A wooden desk sat against the far wall, its surface buried under papers, notebooks, and an old typewriter coated in dust. Above the desk hung a large map of Denver and surrounding counties marked with tiny red pins connected by strings. Tommy stepped inside, his breath catching. "What is all this?" Jack approached the desk, his boots scuffing old debris. He picked up a notebook. David's handwriting filled the yellowed pages. Names, addresses, notes about veteran families struggling with homelessness, addiction, untreated PTSD. Some of the notes were brief: lost job, needs winter coat. Others were more haunting: wife left, sleeping in car. Declined help, said, he's used to being invisible. Jack felt the words stab at something deep inside him, because they echoed his own haunted years after returning home. He swallowed hard, turning to the next page, a list of numbers beside rows of crossed-out names indicating that David had been sending money or supplies in secret. "He was helping people," Tommy whispered behind him. Jack nodded. "Yeah, he was trying to fix what the world broke." Rex nudged Jack's thigh, prompting him to turn his attention to a small locked drawer on the side of the desk. The lock was old, rusted, fragile. Jack pried it gently with his knife. The drawer popped open, revealing a large envelope marked with trembling handwriting for whoever carries this forward. Inside was a second stack of documents and a single faded photograph. Jack lifted the picture carefully. It showed David and 2 other men sitting on the back of a military truck. One man was tall, lean, and angular with sharp features and dark stubble. His eyes had a fierce determination, like a man who had endured more than he could ever voice. The other was shorter, broad-shouldered, with sandy blonde hair and a jaw that seemed constantly clenched. Though smiling in the photograph, there was a hardness behind his eyes, as if trust came to him slowly and painfully. Beneath the photograph, a small note introduced them. Sergeant Alan Brooks and Corporal Michael Reyes, the 2 men who had helped David create the Veterans Support Fund. Jack recognized the type of men they were from the look in their eyes, men molded by war, shaped by loyalty, broken by loss, but still trying to do something meaningful with what pieces remained. "They helped him," Tommy said. "Guess he wasn't alone." "No," Jack murmured. "Even soldiers fighting different battles can still stand together." Rex's low growl pulled Jack from his thoughts. The dog stood in the doorway, head turned toward the living room. Jack pocketed the photograph and nodded to Tommy. They returned to the main room where the metal box still sat. Jack released the latch and opened it. Inside were rows of ledger's receipts and handwritten notes tracking every dollar contributed to the fund. But beneath the paperwork was something else wrapped in a cloth. Jack unfolded it. A small metal star glinted weakly in the dim light. Tommy tilted his head. "What is it?" "A lieutenant's bar," Jack said softly. "My uncle was an officer." Alongside it lay a miniature American flag, carefully folded, likely from one of the funerals David had attended for fallen comrades. Jack's throat tightened with emotion he didn't expect. He imagined his uncle carrying these items from place to place even when hope faded. Tommy reached out, running a finger over the cloth star. He wanted someone to care, the boy whispered. He didn't want it to disappear. Jack closed the box. The weight of family responsibility, blood memory legacy, pressed hard on him. The room felt smaller with each breath. For years, Jack had lived like a man waiting for life to end quietly. But here, in this silent house buried under snow and sorrow, David's voice reached through time, urging him forward. Rex barked twice, his tail thumping confidently against the floor. The sound was decisive, almost demanding. Jack let out a slow breath, rubbing Rex's ears. "Yeah, buddy," he murmured. "I hear you." Tommy stood at Jack's side, clutching the warm fur at Rex's neck for comfort. The boy looked up with hopeful, uncertain eyes. "What? What do we do now?" Jack looked at the metal box, at the map filled with red pins, at the room full of ghosts who had tried to help those the world forgot. He felt something shift, a quiet resolve forming in a place inside him that had long been dark. "We finish what he started," Jack said, his voice steady. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, but the house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a beginning. Winter still clung to Denver like a second skin, but the wooden house at the edge of the neighborhood no longer felt like a shrine for ghosts. Months had passed since Jack first opened David's metal box, and in that time the house had transformed from a frozen relic into a place where warmth grew not from radiators or fireplaces, but from the presence of people who had nowhere else to go. Snow layered the roof in thick white waves, yet inside the quiet hum of conversation and the smell of warm soup gave the air a softness Jack had not felt in years. Jack moved through the living room with the steady gait of a man who finally understood the purpose of his steps. He wore an old slate-gray sweater frayed at the elbows, loose around the shoulders, that made him look less like a hardened veteran and more like someone rebuilding himself slowly. The deep lines around his mouth no longer cut so sharply, and the shadows beneath his eyes had softened since the nights when sleep felt like a battlefield. The house was no longer his burden. It was becoming his anchor. Near the fireplace sat Mr. Harold Green, a Vietnam-era veteran in his late 60s, who had moved into the shelter 3 weeks earlier. Harold had a wiry frame, snow-white hair kept combed back neatly, and a weathered face lined by decades of hardship, but his eyes were gentle, mossy green, and carried the faint spark of a man once known for his easy jokes. Life after the war had not been kind to him. Years of drifting divorces and the death of his son had turned him cautious, skittish even. But here beside the fire, wrapped in a thick blanket, Rex insisted on dragging over to him night after night. Harold looked almost peaceful. On the opposite end of the room, a young mother sat on the floor with her toddler. She was Sarah Donnelly, a woman in her early 30s, tall and slender with long, dark auburn hair that fell over her shoulders in gentle waves. Her skin was pale with a dusting of freckles across her nose, but her eyes, milk chocolate brown, held a heaviness that did not belong on someone so young. Abandoned by her partner and driven from her apartment after losing her job, she had arrived at the shelter with a trembling 2-year-old boy named Caleb. Sarah, though soft-spoken, carried herself with a quiet strength. Her voice rarely rose, her movements were careful and measured, but every action she took for Caleb radiated resolve. Jack had noticed how she always sat where she could see every door and window, an instinct born from fear, not habit. Rex, ever perceptive, had taken to resting his head in her lap whenever she cried softly at night. Caleb, with his curly blonde hair and wide hazel eyes, adored Rex and often crawled onto the dog's back, giggling when Rex pretended not to notice the extra weight. The dog had matured in these months, too. Rex was now a steady guardian rather than a restless scout. His thick fur glimmered under the warm lights, his sturdy frame moving silently from one person to another, checking on them with gentle nudges or placing his head on someone's knee. He had a way of sensing sorrow like a scent drifting toward it and settling down until it eased. Jack had always known Rex was special, but watching him now comforting veterans who flinched at loud noises, children who feared the dark mothers who carried invisible bruises, Jack realized Rex had found his calling just as surely as he himself had. Tommy was a frequent visitor, bursting through the front door every Saturday morning with the enthusiasm of a boy discovering life all over again. After being placed with a foster family, a kind older couple in their mid-50s, Tommy had blossomed. His cheeks were rounder, his eyes brighter, and his shoulders no longer hunched as if expecting the next blow. But he loved the cabin too much to stay away for long. Today he arrived wearing a new navy blue jacket that fit him perfectly, his brown hair combed for once, though still rebelliously messy at the back. He ran to Rex, immediately dropping to his knees and burying his face in the dog's fur. "I missed you, buddy," Rex responded with an excited bark tail wagging so hard it thumped against Harold's chair. Tommy laughed, the sound bright and unrestrained. It filled the room like a spark. "Careful now," Harold chuckled, adjusting his blanket as he watched the reunion. "That dog's got a tail like a whip." "He just loves me a lot," Tommy said proudly, wrapping his arms around Rex's neck. Sarah looked up from where she sat with Caleb. "He loves everyone here," she said softly. "He's like the soul of this place." Jack paused in the doorway, watching them. The room glowed with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the string lights he'd hung across the beams. For the first time in years, Jack felt not like a visitor in his own life, but a part of something woven gently, patiently into being. Over the next few hours, the cabin filled with the soft rhythm of ordinary living. Harold shared old stories of his youth, some joyful, some painful, all spoken with a tone of gratitude that someone finally wanted to listen. Sarah helped Jack prepare dinner in the small kitchen. Her movements were graceful, almost delicate, though there was still tension in her shoulders. "You're doing something good, Jack," she said quietly, as she chopped vegetables. "This place, it saved us." Jack paused, leaning against the counter. "David started it," he replied. "I'm just picking up the pieces he left." Maybe she murmured, "But you're also putting them back together." Her smile was faint but genuine, and something in Jack's chest warmed with more than just gratitude. As night settled, snow began falling heavily again, blanketing the world outside in soft white. Inside, the fire crackled. Caleb giggled in his sleep. Harold dozed with his chin on his chest, and Rex curled at Jack's feet, tail tapping softly against the floor in contentment. Tommy sat beside Jack, swinging his legs, humming quietly. Jack looked out the frosted window at the swirling snowflakes. He remembered winters spent in silence, years when loneliness seemed louder than any storm. But now the cabin felt alive. Rex lifted his head, nudged Jack's palm, and settled again. Tommy leaned his shoulder against Jack's arm. Sarah rested her hand on Caleb's back. Harold snored gently. Jack exhaled slowly and realized the truth: this house wasn't just shelter, it was healing. And he, in a way he never thought possible, belonged here. It was David's legacy, but also his own rebirth. Winter still ruled Denver. But inside this wooden house, loneliness had seen its final season. In the end, Jack learned something many of us forget. In the noise of daily life, sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels or blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a lost child, an old letter, a loyal dog, or a stranger who needs a place to rest. And when we open our doors, even just a little, God has a way of filling the room with more grace than we ever expected. This story reminds us that no winter lasts forever, and no heart is too broken to be mended. What Jack found wasn't just a hidden legacy from his uncle. It was a reminder that God places small lights along our path, guiding us through the coldest nights if we're willing to follow them. If this story touched you even in a small way, we invite you to share it with someone who might need a spark of hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of courage, kindness, and the quiet miracles that still happen around us every day. May God watch over you, bless your home, and keep you warm through every season of your life.